Coming up, the top seeds in the East are locked in, and the Dallas Mavericks are rallying at the last possible point to try to make the playoffs. This is Locked On Game to Game, NBA.
Every game, every team, every angle. Locked On Game to Game, your team every day.
Welcome in. You're listening to Locked On Game to Game NBA. Local experts join us to go over the biggest stories on the hardwood and recap all of the action for you from last night in the NBA. I'm your host, Kainani Stevens. Thank you for making Locked On your first listen every single weekday. Milwaukee did not have Giannis last night, but they still locked up that number one seed in the East with a win over Chicago. Locked On Bucks and Locked On Bulls are in to go over the playoff implications.
Trailing by 10 points early in the third quarter, it looked like the Bucks could be in some trouble, but they rally to pick up a big win over the Chicago Bulls at home and lock in the number one seed in the Eastern Conference and the best record in the NBA overall to ensure they will have home court as long as they are in the NBA postseason. My name's Kane Pittman. I'm the host of the Locked On Bucks podcast. No Giannis tonight. A couple of other injuries lingering around this team, so they relied on the depth to beat the Bulls. You get 27 from Bobby Portis, 26 from Brook Lopez, 20 points and 15 assists from Drew Holiday as well. Some excellent defense from Wesley Matthews and Jay Crowder to limit DeMar DeRozan. This is a veteran Bucks team that has contributors right down the roster. Now, there is a significant concern to come out of this game. Chris Middleton played only 8 minutes, exited the game with right knee soreness. He looked lame after the first offensive possession of the game. So we will be on Chris Middleton watch. This was only his 33rd game of the season, so this has been a storyline throughout the year. We're going to wrap it all up on Locked On Bucks, wherever you get your podcasts.
As once said by Denny Green, the Chicago Bulls are who we thought they were as they drop yet another game to the Milwaukee Bucks. This time 105-92, but no Giannis. Chris Middleton goes out in the first quarter, and you know what? This joke that is the Chicago Bulls season continues to roll forward. I'm Pat, the designer from Locked On Bulls, and I'm not going to lie to you. At this point, they're a team that has no idea what the moment is. They're a team that has no idea when it's time to fight the hardest. DeMar DeRozan sub 10 points today, 8 points on the game as he got cooked by Drew Holiday defensively, and Zach LaVine couldn't figure it out himself either. You know what? This team heading into the play-in tournament, as they've clinched it, continues to show that they just don't have heart in the moments you need it most. We'll talk about it more on Locked On Bulls tonight. Me and Hayes will be breaking it down. Appreciate you guys for showing love, as always. Bulls fans, I'm here for you. Y'all stay safe out of Chicago. Peace.
The Bucks locked in the top seed. The Celtics locked in the number 2 seed after an ugly win over the Raptors. Locked On Raptors and Locked On Celtics go over the game and also postseason seeding.
Three-point shooting. It's important. Sean Woodley here from Locked On Raptors to break down the Toronto Raptors' 97-93 loss to the Boston Celtics, who were without Jason Tatum, Al Horford, and a couple others in this one against a fully healthy Raptors squad that got back Gary Trent Jr. from injury. Problem was, Gary Trent Jr. nor the rest of the team could hit a single three to save their lives. There were lots of moments of very good offensive process for the Raptors in this game. Tons of well-created, wide-open looks. Healthy-looking offense. Really good defense as well for long stretches, too, against a Celtics team that still has a lot of creation in it. Malcolm Brogdon and, of course, Jaylen Brown was playing in this game. But, of course, the Raptors just could not connect at all. 6 of 33 from deep. You get 2 of 8 from OG Anunoby, 1 of 11 from Fred VanVleet. That is not the recipe for this team to win, and it's a pretty dire loss because coupled with the Atlanta Hawks beating the Washington Wizards, the Raptors are now a game behind Atlanta without the tiebreaker with just 2 games to play for the 8th seed in the Eastern Conference. It's looking ever more likely like the Raptors will have to host a play-in game and in the 9-10 bracket against the Chicago Bulls. We'll have more on this game broken down on tomorrow's episode of Locked On Raptors. Be sure to tune in.
Boston Celtics win ugly over the Toronto Raptors and clinch the 2nd seed in the East. I'm John Corrales from the Locked On Celtics podcast here at the TD Garden, where Boston held on for a 97-93 win. It was not pretty. It was not something they're going to write home about, but Jaylen Brown had a nice game, a double-double. Malcolm Brogdon is the real story of the game. He hit a three-pointer with the game tied at 82 to break that tie and help the Celtics hold off the Raptors. He's making a strong case for Sixth Man of the Year over the last few games. And the Celtics now can kind of take the next couple of games off, get some weird lineups out there. They'll rest Jaylen Brown. Jason Tatum will come back and play one of these next two games. But all we need to know is Celtics hold on. They're the second seed, and now they get to prepare for whoever comes out of that first game in the play-in tournament.
LA's two teams faced off in a must-win for both of them as they're trying to avoid the play-in game in the West. Locked On Clippers goes over the victory at Crypto.com Arena.
The LA Clippers played the LA Lakers in what was probably the biggest hallway series game in the history of the two franchises in Los Angeles. And that's coming from somebody who actually studies that stuff. I'm Darian Vaziri, host of Locked On Clippers, coming to you to talk about the 11th straight win for the Clippers over the Lakers. 11-0 now in the Ty Lue era, and Russell Westbrook set the tone in the beginning of the game with 2 threes. LeBron James was guarding him, or should I say not even guarding him, and Russ took advantage of that, getting the Clippers off to an early lead. And even though the Lakers made a couple of pushes, the Clippers did a good job of staying with the lead and closing out the game. It took Kawhi Leonard playing the entire second half to get the job done, but he got big-time help from Norman Powell, who had 27 points. Bones Highland, who had 14, all in the fourth for a 125-118 win.
New Orleans showing a flash of what they are capable of. They upset the shorthanded Memphis Grizzlies in overtime yesterday. Locked On Grizzlies and Locked On Pelicans are in with a full breakdown.
It took a historic performance from the New Orleans Pelicans from 3, at one point going 13 of 17 from beyond the arc, an unspeakable amount of hot streak shooting for the New Orleans squad to knock off a Grizzlies team that essentially had an 8-man rotation, half of which was made up with 3 rookies and John Conchar. I'm not sweating that loss. You shouldn't either. I'm Joe Mullinax of Locked On Grizzlies. Focus on Jaren Jackson Jr. dominating a 40-point performance. Really impressive shooting. Focus on Dylan Brooks having an effective game defensively and offensively as well. There were things to be positive about. Don't get me wrong. There were ways that the Grizzlies could have made that a better performance. We're going to talk a lot about 3-point defense on Thursday's episode of Locked On Grizzlies. But Memphis was the underdog, and the Pelicans did what they were supposed to do in a roundabout way.
The Pelicans don't always make it easy, but in their win over the Memphis Grizzlies, they showed you what they are made of. I'm Jake Madison, host of Locked On Pelicans. From down 19 points to up 6 with 11 seconds to go to overtime, it was an up and down game to say the least. But with a play-in spot on the line, the Pelicans found the offense they needed in the fourth quarter. With Brandon Ingram playmaking, the Pelicans hit 7 straight threes and surged ahead. They looked like the team that's been one of the hottest in the NBA for the past 2 weeks. And yes, they blew that lead as the game went to overtime, but with all the momentum in favor of the Grizzlies, the Pelicans settled down and again responded and showed you who they are, holding the Grizzlies scoreless for the first 3 minutes of the extra period. Brandon Ingram closed this one out. It's exactly how the Pelicans are built to win games right now, without Zion Williamson. Better late than never to figure it out. And now we wait for a Zion Williamson update sometime on Wednesday, which could have big implications on the play-in tournament.
Coming up, the Mavs not waving the white flag just yet. This is Locked On Game to Game, NBA. Today's edition of Locked On Game to Game is brought to you by FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. The NBA playoffs are just days away at this point. New customers get that no-sweat first bet of up to $1,000 at FanDuel, so that's bonus bets back if your first bet doesn't win. Just download the FanDuel Sportsbook app. It's safe, secure, super easy to use. You can bet on everything from the money line to point scorers to threes that are drained. FanDuel even lets you combine your bets for a chance at a bigger payout with that same game parlay. Don't miss the chance to get your no-sweat first bet of up to $1,000 in bonus bets when you go to FanDuel.com/lockedon. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon to learn more. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sports betting partner of the NBA. Welcome back. You're listening to Locked On Game to Game NBA, local experts going over the biggest stories in basketball. I'm your host, Kainani Stevens. Thank you again for making Locked On your first listen every weekday. There is just the faintest of pulses in Dallas as the Mavericks, at the last possible moment, are deciding that they want to win basketball games and hopefully make the play-in game. Locked on Mavs going over that win last night against Sacramento.
They will not go softly into that good night, I guess. The Dallas Mavericks beat the Sacramento Kings 123-119, and their play-in hopes are still alive. Somehow, this Dallas Mavericks team has been dead for weeks and weeks now, and they come alive in this one in a couple of ways. They allowed the Kings 19 offensive rebounds, which seemed nuts. Tim Hardaway Jr. came alive, 24 points for him. Luka and Kyrie combined for 60 points, and then Christian Wood, 12 points in the fourth quarter. A really massive game for the Mavericks, and they played a team that plays basically the same way that they do. They allow a bunch of points, but they score a lot of points, and the Mavericks were able to take advantage of a team on the second night of a back-to-back in the Sacramento Kings. Mavericks on a couple days rest, and you could tell by the end of this, just some weird mental mistakes by the Kings, and the Mavericks taking advantage of it, making their shots and playing hard when it mattered, when this team's season relied on it.
Brooklyn was victorious last night in Detroit, and they are now one win away from securing the number 6 seed and avoiding that play-in game. Locked on Nets excited to avoid that play-in game. Locked on Pistons looking forward to the merciful end of the Pistons season.
Doug Norrie, Locked On Nets, coming at you following a 123-108 win by the Brooklyn Nets on the road against the Pistons. The game, something of formality when it came to the final score, but what's important here is the Nets make their magic number 1 to secure a place with the 6th seed in the playoffs, to avoid the play-in game. That is what the Brooklyn Nets have been shooting for here in the short term, even since the trade deadline when they shipped out Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving. It was a full team effort on the part of the Nets. They were led by Mikal Bridges, who had 26 points, but really it was a story of a full team that took care of business on the road against Detroit in a game they had to win. Stay out of that play-in game, baby. We're going to be talking about what is setting up for the Nets here over the last couple games of the season and why folks should even watch what happens with the Sixers and the Heat on Thursday. We'll be covering it all.
The final Pistons home game is under wraps. They lose to the Brooklyn Nets again. The final home game of the season. There's just 2 more games in the season for the Detroit Pistons. Host of Locked On Pistons podcast, Kukil here. The Pistons finish off this season with just 9 wins at home. They're sitting at 16 wins on the season. They are not going to reach 20 wins. They may not even reach 18 wins on the season. It's been a really tough season for Pistons fans, but despite that, they've showed up this season. They're 11th in the league when it comes to fans that show up, the amount of fans that show up per game. So final home game, but the Pistons fans have showed out this season, and you guys deserve a ton of credit. In this game, Jaden Ivey continued to play really well. We saw RJ Hampton turn into Steph Curry for a brief second there in the third quarter, hitting 5 threes. But at the end of the day, they lose another game in what's been just a tough season for Pistons fans. And hopefully we get paid off with Victor Wembanyama in the offseason.
The Knicks rested their stars. They still got a win in Indy on Wednesday. Locked on Pacers goes over last night's matchup.
Pacers fall to the Knicks 138-129. I'm Tony East, the host of Locked On Pacers, here to tell you about a forgettable chapter of the Hicks versus Knicks rivalry, as the Pacers were in this game, but only kind of. They had a horrible start, down 14 so early in this game. They had a horrible close, getting smoked in the final 4 minutes of this game. They played well in between, but it wasn't enough after that start and the finish. Their starting 5 just wasn't gelling as it has in recent games in this battle, right? They needed more from Benedict Mathurin, who had too many turnovers. They didn't get the same offensive punch from rookie point guard Andrew Nembhard, and they had a good balance. They had good nights from both of those players, but in general, it wasn't the same look from the starting 5 or feel from the team that they've had in recent games, and they needed more. Without their stars, Tyrese Haliburton and Miles Turner out, they could not take down the Knicks, even without the Knicks stars. No Julius Randle or Jalen Brunson in this game. Pacers playing for draft positioning. Knicks have clinched the 5 seed. We'll have more on the Locked On Pacers podcast.
Trae Young and the Hawks fighting for their playoff lives. They got a win over Washington in the process. Locked On Wizards gives us a full recap of that game.
What's up, everybody? It's your boy Brandon Scott again with Locked On Wizards. The Washington Wizards lose in the ATL to the Atlanta Hawks, 134-116. How did they lose this game? Well, first of all, Trae Young, 25 points, and John Collins, 23 points. But looking at the Wizards, obviously now with 6 guys injured or down with an illness, they are in a soft tank and giving a lot of playing time to the young core. And looking at these young guys for the Wizards, to the highlight, Johnny Davis, 20 points, shooting 8 for 18 from the field, and Daniel Gafford, the center, contributed with 25 points, 10 rebounds. So it is definitely playing time for the young guys in DC to see what this organization has going into the offseason. So again, the Wizards lose tonight, 134-116. And next up, at home Friday against the Miami Heat. Appreciate everybody and have a good night.
That's going to do it for this edition of Locked On Game to Game NBA. Thank you for making Locked On your first listen every single weekday. Make sure you're subscribed to Locked On NBA and your favorite teams Locked On podcast on YouTube and wherever else you get your podcasts from, especially now with the postseason right around the corner. I'm your host, Kainani Stevens. This has been Locked On Game to Game.